Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jennifer LaRue. I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'm so delighted to be hosting this evening's program with Cappy McGarr and Colin McEnroe, talking about Cappy's brand new book, The Man Who Made Mark Twain Famous. I'll introduce them more fully in just a moment. I just have a tiny bit of housekeeping to do before we get started. So I see some of you are already chatting away in the chat. Please continue to do that. That's part of the fun of these virtual programs. And so share whatever you feel like sharing there in the chat. And know also that this program is being recorded. You can come back and watch it anytime you like. But the chat remains live in perpetuity. So if you want to come back on and reconnect with somebody that you've made friends with here, come back and do that. However, toward the end of our program, we're going to be having a question and answer session. And if you have a question for either Cappy or Colin, if you do me the favor of putting that question in the Ask a Question tab that you see at the very center of the bottom of the screen, rather than thanks, Colin. Rather than in the chat, that'll make it a lot easier for me to manage that portion of the program. So please do that. And part of the fun of the Ask a Question section, too, is that you can go and look at other people's questions. If you have the same question, you can upvote it. And it's kind of fun to see what other people are thinking. So please take advantage of that. While we're looking at that portion of the screen, I'd encourage you, if you would, to look just above the Ask a Question area to that long green bar that says your support is vital to the Mark Twain House and Museum. Please donate here. I got to say, I'm really proud of our staff at the Mark Twain House for the way we have managed COVID. It's been very, very challenging, as it has been for just about everybody everywhere. But we have managed to stay active through our virtual programs and other activities. We've stayed connected. We've continued to provide content and things to do in the evening throughout the COVID pandemic. And the thing is, we now have our major source of revenue back in place. We are now offering our guided house tour, and people are coming in droves. So that's absolutely fantastic, and we're thrilled to have people back. But we're doing a little bit of catch-up ball, to be honest with you. These programs are not free to mount, although they are mostly free for you to attend. I say all of this by way of saying anything that you are able to share with us in terms of a donation, be it $5, $50, anywhere in between or more. I just want you to know that on behalf of the staff and the Board of Trustees of the Mark Twain House and Museum, every single penny is deeply appreciated and every single penny is put to very good use. Now, tonight's program is a little bit different in that I don't have a copy of the book yet. There's a problem with our shipment. We're working on that. There is a link in the chat to order a signed copy of Cappy's book. And we assure you that we'll get that to you just as quickly as we can. When I invite Colin and Cappy on screen, they're going to show you the book. But and I'm sorry that I don't have a copy of my own to show you. But please know that if you order that copy through us, now again, we know we can get this book other places, but if you do order it through us, you get a signed copy, first of all. And you also get to know that your purchase benefits the Mark Twain House and Museum, and we appreciate it very much. So let me introduce our guests. Colin McEnroe is a dear friend of the Mark Twain House and Museum. He works just down the street from us at Connecticut Public Media. He's a radio host, newspaper columnist, magazine writer, author, playwright, lecturer, moderator, college instructor, and occasional singer. He started as a radio host in 1992 and moved to Connecticut Public in 2009. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Hartford Courant, many Hearst newspapers, Men's Health, Cosmopolitan, and a bunch of other places. He teaches in the political science department at Yale. And Cappy McGarr is an Emmy-nominated co-creator of the Kennedy Center Mark Twain Prize for American Humor and the Library of Congress Gershwin Prize for Popular Song. He's one of the few people to be appointed by 2 different presidents to the Kennedy Center. His writing has been published in the New York Times, Politico, and USA Today. And I neglected to thank our sponsors, which is very important. Tonight's program, like so many of our programs, is sponsored by the Wish You Well Foundation and by Connecticut Public WNPR. And it's produced in part with support honoring the legacy of Frank Lord. So having said all that, I hope everybody will join me in welcoming to the screen and to the program Colin McEnroe, holding up the book. Thank you, Colin. And Cappy McGarr. Welcome, both
Thank you,
of
Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you both for being here. I'm going to sit back and enjoy the program like everybody else. Colin, will you let me know when it's time to come back up and help with the Q&A?
I will absolutely do that.
All right. Thank you. I'm counting on it. All right. Have fun. I'll see y'all in a little bit.
You know, Cappy, it's funny when she said she has to do a little housekeeping. A lot of the people in your book, quite a few of them have hosted the Oscars at one point or another. And I do remember Ellen DeGeneres coming back from a commercial, and she was vacuuming right along the front row. She had a vacuum going, and she was saying to all these actresses like Penelope Cruz, "Lift those legs, Penelope. That's a beautiful dress." And then saying, I didn't realize this was part of the job. So the book is really fun, and the arc of the award part of the book it kind of goes from Richard Pryor to Dave Chappelle, which is kind of a perfect arc in a lot of ways. But I think maybe the place to begin is with the whole project of getting this award program going. You'd done one with Pryor, and the question was it a one-off, or were you going to keep going? Was it going to be the yearly thing it is now? And this involved you having a conversation ultimately with Gene Kennedy Smith. I'm going to let you pick up that story.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you, Jennifer. It's great to be here at the Mark Twain House. It's certainly a part of the Mark Twain Prize. We give the bronze Mark Twain statue to all of our honorees, and that basically comes from the Mark Twain House. Colin, that's right. We honored the very first recipient was Richard Pryor. And we had Harry Belafonte, we had Whoopi Goldberg, we had a very stellar lineup of people. And Chris Rock had just come off of Saturday Night Live. He probably was the hottest comedian in the country at that time, and still is, quite frankly. He's incredibly funny. So he gets up there, and everybody that came on the stage that evening said, Mark Twain would have been so happy of honoring Richard Pryor with the Mark Twain Prize. Everybody, Twain, Whoopi Goldberg. Twain would have had a big smile on his face of honoring Richard Pryor for getting the first Mark Twain Prize. So then the whole board of the Kennedy Center was sitting in front of me in the concert hall. And by the way, my wife and I, that first year, we bought a third of the concert seats out because it was, for whatever reason, a tough sell. It was a new thing for the Kennedy Center. And so Chris Rock gets up there and he goes, I've heard all this mother effing BS all night, and about Mark Twain would have been so happy about Richard Pryor getting the first Mark Twain. I call BS on that. That is so effing wrong. He would have said, say, Ian, take my effing bag upstairs right now. Of course, laughter burst out in the concert hall. I couldn't see the faces of the board, but I'm now assuming that some of them had frowns on their face. And so the next morning, we're having an executive committee meeting, and Jim Johnson was chair. And Jim said, Cappy, give us an update. And so I gave us said, look, we had the hall was fun and funny, and everybody, it was a new deal, and everybody laughed, and everyone really had a great time. And I said, this is a new deal. We lost about $100,000 this year, but hopefully we can do it next year. So everybody was saying, well, Buffy Kafritz, who had passed away this last year, she was a dear friend of mine. And Alma Powell, Colin Powell's wife, is on the board. And they kind of talked against it. They said, we don't need another event at the Kennedy Center. And so they had a vote. Jean Kennedy Smith voted no. She was at that time ambassador to Ireland, and she flew over for the board meeting. And so I get up, we go to the board meeting, we're walking to the board meeting, and Jim Johnson, the chairman of the Kennedy Center, said, Cappy, I'm so sorry the Mark Twain Prize is not going to happen. I said, well, we only got one no vote. He looked at me, and I won't tell you exactly what he said because it's not for public consumption, but he said, Cappy, she is the president's sister. If she votes no, it will not happen here at the Kennedy Center. I said, okay. So I made a beeline to the ambassador. I said, Ambassador, I said, you voted no. If you don't change your vote, it's not going to happen. She said, well, my brother would have been horrified with the N word and the F word said on the stage bearing his name. I said, well, I couldn't agree with you more, Ambassador. I said, but you need to give me another chance. You need to give us another chance. There's so many people that work so hard on the Mark Twain Prize. I said, we'll honor, Richard. Well, besides Richard Pryor, we'll honor Dick Van Dyke. We'll honor Carl Reiner. Said a whole bunch of names, and she said, well, let me consider it. I said, but one thing your brother stood for, and that was great humor and charm. And I said he had been, I think, very happy on the laughter on the stage bearing his name. So she changed her vote. The rest is history. The 10th year anniversary, we honored Billy Crystal. The rehearsal dinner was at with the Supreme Court, which I emceed. I got a very nice letter from her after I took a full page out in our playbill, and I said I'd like to thank Jean Kennedy Smith for making the Mark Twain possible. She has been a supporter from the very beginning. She sent me this note, and she said, "Dear Cappy," she said a lot of other nice things, but she said, "My brother would have been very happy about what you created on the stage bearing his name. Sincerely, Jean," which went full circle and now raises about $2.5 million for the Kennedy Center every year. So it's become a cornerstone for the Kennedy Center.
One of the things I like about the book, Cappy, is it explores an intersection that's fascinated me, which is that intersection between politics and culture. Politics and music, politics and comedy. And to me, in some ways, there's less of an obvious division among those things than people often like to suggest. But part of this also, and this is illustrated by a story you tell earlier in the book, before the Twain Prize is created, you're doing some work for Tom Daschle. You have a long relationship with Tom Daschle. And at one point, you book Lewis Black. And this was back when you thought that maybe you could control what comedians do and say under certain circumstances. You have the floor.
Colin, thank you for asking me to tell that story. It's still one of the most embarrassing stories I've got with Senator Daschle. I'd gotten Lewis Black to open up for David Crosby, and we had one of those big venues in Washington. There wasn't an empty seat in the House. Huge audience. The entire caucus, all the Democratic senators were there, including Senator Byrd. And so Lewis Black, I'm a big fan of Lewis Black. I'd seen him on the Daily Show, frequently, and seen specials he'd done. I'd never seen him in person, but I knew his routines. So I said, Lewis, we're so glad to have you here, and I just really appreciate you being here. I said, but this is an audience that I've got all the United States senators in the audience, and some of them are pretty conservative and kind of maybe prudish, and I would appreciate you keeping it as clean as you can, and if you just please don't say the F word, I'd really appreciate it. And he looks at me and smiles. He said, well, Cappy, thank you so much for inviting me. So he gets on stage, and I introduce him. He gets on stage. He goes, boy, is it great to be effing here in effing Washington, D.C., and I'm so effing glad. I mean, he couldn't stop saying the F word. And I look at Tom. Tom is just shaking his head no. Then then David Crosby came on, and he sang every song that one would not know. No Crosby, Stills, and Nash songs. He finally sings "Teach Your Children Well," the last song that really is the only song he did for Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So the next morning, Senator Byrd burst into Tom Daschle, his majority leader, his office, and said, Tom, I can't believe you would have such a disgusting event like that. And Lewis Black saying, in fact is, I forgot to mention, after Lewis Black, Senator Byrd walked out of the room. And so he was not happy at all, not happy at all. And so Tom calls me and says, well, Cappy, you did it. I've got Senator Byrd cussing me out. And I said, well, I'm sure he didn't say any bad cuss words, Tom. He goes, well, let's don't do that again. I said, you're right. We're not going to do that again. And by the way, the Kennedy Center, from literally Richard Pryor on, we're not in the business of censoring any person that gets on the stage. We just hope that they respect being at the National Center for Performing Arts, but we're not in the business of censoring anyone.
Right. Anytime you have an event where David Crosby is the second worst behaved person, something has gone wrong. And a lot of it is the provocation, right? I mean, unwittingly, you made Lewis Black feel as though he had to do that to prove a point or to exhibit his own freedom. And, I've actually had some contact with Lewis Black on a couple of occasions. And I don't know what your experience was, but, he's actually a rather toned down, little bit nervous and fidgety kind of guy.
Yes.
And so I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. Not about Lewis Black, but this whole book is just threaded through with your encounters with comic geniuses, some of whom are kind of who you expect them to be, even when the lights are down, and some of whom are not. Have there been any cases where you thought, wow, this person is so different from his or her onstage persona? It's just uncanny.
The first person that comes to mind is Steve Martin. He's a very shy person. We were honoring Tina Fey. Speaker Pelosi, the first time she was speaker, was good enough to give us the statuary hall in the Capitol. And I was emceeing, and I asked Lauren Michaels to give the first toast. And by the way, Janie, my wife, dinner partner, was Steve Martin, and I was on the other side of Steve. And so I, welcomed everybody, did some jokes, got a little bit of laughs, and then I introduced Lauren Michaels. And Lauren comes up about halfway and then turns around to his seat. I don't know why, but he goes and sits down. Now, Lauren Michaels is one of obviously the true comedic gods of living today. I mean, he is truly responsible for so many comedians' lives and everything, that he's got incredible influence in the comedy world. And so I said, well, just like they do I said, well, we'll be right back. And we'll take it up after the first course or whatever. And so I asked Steve, I said, to Steve Martin, I said, Steve, you've got to help me out here. I said, I know you're going to be funny, but will you give a toast for Tina? And he said, yes, but I'm not going up the podium. You can bring me a microphone to my seat. And I said, sure. So he bring a microphone to his seat. And he ceases to be the shy Steve Martin. He becomes the incredibly funny, gracious, humorous, wonderful Steve Martin. Eddie Murphy was just such a pleasant guy. I mean, I took him into the Oval Office to meet President Obama, and he says, Mr. President, so nice to meet you. And Obama says, President says, Eddie, you and I are the same age. You have no gray hair. I've got a lot of gray hair. And Eddie goes, well, Mr. President, you've got a very stressful job. You're president of the free world and most powerful man in the free world. And he said, all I do is make people laugh. And so the president turns my way and says, Cappy, I'm funny, aren't I? And, I didn't pause, but I said, oh, well, of course, Mr. President, of course you are absolutely funny. You're hilarious. And he said, I've got good timing, don't I? Just deadpan. I went, yes, Mr. President, you sure do. And then I took Eddie and his family to a tour of the White House. He's standing in front of the Ronald Reagan portrait, this very famous painting in the White House, and I'm standing behind him, and I go, well, Eddie, welcome to the White House. Mommy and I are glad to have you here. Just just behave yourself. And so he turns around, gives me a big hug. He said, that's a really good Reagan. Do you do any more impressions? I said, well, I do Carter. He goes, well, Carter was one of my very first impressions. He does Carter a lot better than I'll ever do Carter. And he said, let me hear your Carter. Well, the White House is a great example for Habitat for Humanity. He goes, well, you do any more? And I said, well, this is right before the Clinton-Trump election. This is in October. And I said, well, I do Clinton. He said, well, let me hear Clinton. I said, well, this is Bill Clinton. I just hope Hillary wins because I want to interview interns. And so we bonded, and he was just a decent, nice, down-to-earth person. Same thing with Bill Murray. But, the only person that you would think of would be manic, not on stage, would be Robin Williams. And he came to several of our Mark Twain prizes. And yes, he was a great ad-libber, but he practiced a lot of his routine on stage. I mean, he went over, and it made it look like he was just, ad-libbing. But a lot of that was well thought out. And he was incredibly shy. I mean, very nice, very down to earth, but very, 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 very shy.
Yeah, as a comedy nerd, I've kind of studied all these people a lot. And what didn't surprise me, speaking of Steve Martin, is so there's a thing in the book where there's a walkthrough before the award ceremony. And the comedians who are going to perform, they walk through, right, for the lighting cues, the sound cues, whatever. But they're not going to show you their material. They're not going to, but Steve Martin, actually worked on his material during the walkthrough. And that's so believable to me. I think it's exactly who he is. He's a perfectionist, and he's like this consummate pro. He makes it look easy, like he's this wild and crazy guy, to coin a phrase. But clearly, it's not like that.
Colin, you're absolutely right. The teleprompter guy went, pause. Steve said, put that in, take that out. I don't feel comfortable with this. Put this in. I mean, it was a true student of comedy, like you and I are marvel at incredible genius of Steve Martin.
So people out there might be asking, who won't say yes to a Mark Twain prize? And the answer is Mel Brooks, which is kind of surprising. So tell us about that.
I love Mel Brooks. He is my comedic hero for sure. And a lot of people don't know, but on Blazing Saddles, Richard Pryor wrote Blazing Saddles. And so Deborah Rutter, the president of the Kennedy Center, called me and said, look, we've paid Mel Brooks to come to the Kennedy Center to show Blazing Saddles and then talk about Blazing Saddles for 90 minutes. And by the way, it sold out in like 2 or 3 hours. So she knew that I wanted to meet Mel Brooks. And she said, look, would you like to have dinner with him? While they're seeing the movie Blazing Saddles, we can have dinner with him in the green room. I said, well, gosh, that is the most exciting thing like ever. So I'm in Washington at a big fancy dinner the week before, and I see David Rubenstein, who's chairman of the board of the Kennedy Center, as you know. And he said, hey, listen, when are you going to be back? Let's get together. When are you going to be back in Washington? I said, well, I'm coming next Thursday. He goes, really? Why? And I said, well, I'm going to have dinner with Mel Brooks at the Kennedy Center. He said, how you doing that? I said, well, the president of the Kennedy Center called me and asked me to come. He said, well, do you think I can come? I said, David, I don't know. You're chairman of the Kennedy Center, so I'll have to ask the chairman if he can come. Anyway, David and I were like two kids in a candy store, waiting for Mel Brooks, waiting for him in the front of the Kennedy Center. And Deborah Rutter was cool, calm, collected. She came down right before. She said, no, hey, let's just wait for him in the green room. And we didn't want to wait for him in the green room. So we're waiting for him in the green room. He comes in the green room. And, I'm not intimidated by many people, but I was a little intimidated by Mel Brooks. So in his contract, it said he wanted egg salad sandwiches were piled high in a pyramid. He wanted real Lay's potato chips, not wavy Lay's, real Lay's. And he wanted Oreo cookies, real Oreo cookies, not any double dipped Oreo cookies. And he wanted real Coke, not Diet Coke. He actually turned 95 this last summer. So I'm scratching my head. That must be a great diet. I think we all ought to be on that egg salad diet. And so there is I'm not going to repeat it because it's not appropriate. And this is also going to be reviewed many, many times. But there's a thing in the Blazing Saddles called a number 6. And so if you are an aficionado of Blazing Saddles, you'll know what a number 6 is. And so Mel's on the couch. I'm sitting on the piano bench. We're eating egg salad sandwiches. And I said, Mel, you haven't taken the Mark Twain Prize. We've asked you 3 or 4 times. He said, yeah, I know. I'm not sure. Yeah, I said, look, we could do the music of Mel Brooks. High Anxiety. I'm So Tired. Springtime for Hitler. It's great music, which you've written. He said, well, that's an interesting idea. I may have to think about that. And I said, Mel, look, if you don't take it, I'm going to have to do a number 6 on you, of which he laughed really big. And I got egg salad sandwich on me, but that's okay. I got egg salad sandwich from Mel Brooks. So he's leaving. He said, I'll let you know in a couple of weeks if I'm going to take the Mark Twain Prize. I said, well, I appreciate it. Long story short, he said no 2 weeks later. So it was very disappointing, but he definitely deserves the Mark Twain Prize. He's was one of the very first television comedy writers from Your Show of Shows. He did this incredible stand-up with Carl Reiner, a 2,000-year-old man, and obviously all of his wonderful, spectacular, funny movies.
Yeah, I used to love reading about these. He and Reiner were best friends for life, and apparently would get together basically every day.
Every night.
Yeah, every night. And they would watch movies. And at one point he was doing an interview and he said, we like to watch those Bourne Identity movies. And because Carl and I are so old. we actually don't know what happens, no matter how many. I'll say to Carl, I think he gets out of this one. And just,
Carl also asked Mel to take the Mark Twain Prize, and he turned Carl down.
And he's never really explained why, right? Why he's not going to do it.
I mean, we gave him the Kennedy Center honors, so but I don't know why. He didn't have an aversion to the Kennedy Center. He just got an aversion to, I think, the Mark Twain Prize. But look, if he would say, if he called today and said, "Okay, I've changed my mind," we'd obviously honor him. We'd go to L.A. and have a private honor ceremony if he wanted to have that. But anyway, I love Mel Brooks, and he is one of my true comedic heroes for sure.
So we were talking a little bit about this during sound check or whatever it was we were doing, but there's a great scene in the book where Will Ferrell figures out a way to kind of, I don't know, do something physical and interesting that probably had not occurred to any previous Twain Prize recipient. So give us that story.
Well, the chairman at the end of the show, and all the talent comes and honors the honoree. Comes out and gives the Mark Twain Prize, which is a Mark Twain bust. It's a bronze bust provided by the Mark Twain House, by the way, and gives the Mark Twain Prize, takes it off the podium and gives this Twain bust to Will Ferrell. Well, we had about 20 ceramic Twain statues made. And in rehearsal, he broke 8 or 9 of them. So he came out. The chairman of the board gives the Twain to Will Ferrell, and he says, I treasure this. This is my most favorite thing ever. I'm not ever going to let my kids touch it. I'm going to buy a seat on the airplane back so no one will be able to touch this wonderful, wonderful statue. And he goes over to try and puts it on the podium, but before he gets to the podium, he accidentally drops it, and it shatters into 1,000 pieces. And he picks it up. Of course, I mean, you could hear the gasp in the audience. And he picks up all the shattered pieces and puts them on the podium. And Twain's half face is at the top. He kind of puts it on there. He said, "I'm going to take very, very good care of this." And then he goes on with how wonderful it was to accept the Mark Twain Prize. And if you haven't seen it, go to YouTube or go to PBS and look at it, because it's really one of the funniest things. By the way, afterwards, the chairman, I think, brought him the actual Mark Twain Prize bronze, so he could literally take it back with him on the airplane with his own seat.
Right. Isn't it the case that the prize is actually heavy, and they tell people not to try to bring it back from the podium? Was it Reiner who insisted on going back and getting it?
Yeah, Carl said, "I'm not. I got a prize in Spain or somewhere, some movie. I think Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid or some movie he directed and produced." And he goes, "But I never got the award, so I'm not going to let this out of my sight." He goes back to the podium, carries it off. There's a wonderful, poignant story, Colin, if about Charlie's Reiner.
Well, you should tell that story. It's a very lovely story.
Because I think it's just one of the most wonderful stories of my experience of being involved with the Twain. So I called the White House Social Secretary was Ann Stock was the previous White House Social Secretary, and she set up with the current White House Social Secretary a meet and greet with the president. And it was kind of our first meet and greet. And so in the cabinet room, we had Mary Tyler Moore, Dick Van Dyke, Rob Reiner, Jerry Seinfeld, his new wife, over a couple of years, I guess, and she was pregnant, and all the wives. Janie, my wife, was there as well. So the White House Social Secretary came in and said, "Listen, I want you to be there and introduce everybody to the president. The president will obviously know all the famous people, but you'll know all the wives." And Carl had called about maybe 2 weeks earlier and said, "I'd like to bring my brother to the White House, Charlie. He's really responsible for me getting into comedy in the first place." And Charlie was at that time dying of cancer. He died shortly after this particular episode. And he had oxygen. He had, these plastic things in his nose. And Carl said, "Look, I'd like to take Charlie in first because I don't know how long his energy is going to last." And I said, "Perfect. That's great." So Carl's pushing. Charlie takes the plastic nose things out of his nose, meeting the president of the United States. Carl pushes him in the Oval Office, And I said, Mr. President, this is Charlie. And the president puts his hand, kind of moves me away. He said, Cappy, you don't have to introduce me to Charlie Reiner. President Clinton gets on his knees and grabs Charlie's hands and said, Charlie, I've had a lot of important people in the Oval Office, but not nearly as important as you. You were the first wave on Normandy Beach. And he had cited like 8 different times of Charlie's heroic moments in Charlie's military life. You know, I'm kind of cracking up now, but we were all crying, and Charlie was crying, and Carl was crying, and President Clinton does that so well, and he just went on and went on, made Charlie feel like just a hero that he was. And it just was one of the most moving moments I've ever had in the Oval Office, for sure.
Yeah, it really is a lovely story. What are the people that I'm fascinated by? And I'm sure I'm sensing you're kind of a comedy nerd too. So is Tina Fey, and one of the younger people ever to get this award. And I just listening to her comedy writing, I'm just amazed at what she does. And I feel like she puts beats in that nobody else puts in and stuff. And so I don't even know what my specific question is. I certainly enjoy all the stuff that you cite in the book. And I love that towards the end of her acceptance speech, she said, I hope, that someday I'll be Mark Twain, and that 100 years later, people will look at my writing and go, that was pretty racist, actually. But I don't know. Give me a sense of the person that you met. You get a chance to work with these people, over a period of days. Who did you meet when you met Tina Fey?
Tina Fey is still one of the nicest people ever, and also one of the funniest people ever. She, in fact, was our youngest Mark Twain Prize recipient. Why? First woman writer of a major television show, SNL. Had an incredible 30 Rock, a huge hit on NBC and with 30 Rock, and she, the movie Mean Girls. I mean, she truly is a comedic genius, and she's also incredibly nice. I got blurbs. I had to get blurbs for my book, right? So I sent her an email, said, Tina, look, I'd like to, thank you on the blurbs on the back. I said, Tina, I'd like for you to write a blurb. And I didn't hear from her, and I had a deadline. I said I had a deadline. So after the deadline passed, about 2 weeks after that, she said, I'm so sorry, I only do 2 blurbs a year, and I've already done those, but you've got a quorum of great blurbers, so you don't need me. I wanted to call her back and ask her and say, well, can I use that as one of my, ads for, that's really funny. But Tina's a wonderful, brilliant comedy person that she has influenced so many people that followed her as well. So she's truly an icon.
So I'm not going to have you tell all the Bill Murray stuff in your book, and you clearly connected with Bill Murray, and it extended well beyond just the Twain Prize stuff, and he blurbed your book. I just want you to tell, because this is something that I know about, but I'm not sure how many people know about this. Bill Murray, if you try to book Bill Murray, even to give him the Twain Prize, there's no clear path. I mean, everybody else has people, they got people, you find out who their people are, those people tell you about other people, but sooner or later you're talking to the right people. Bill Murray's got like this 1-800 number that anybody can call, and a lawyer, right?
That's exactly right, Colin. I love Bill Murray. He's got a lawyer and no publicist, no agent, no nothing. As you're right, he's got an 800 number that if you want to have him appear in a movie or something, you leave a voicemail, I think, and if he likes it, he'll call you back. And so the President Kennedy Center called me and said, listen, Cappy, we're going to move on. It's been a month. We sent a letter to his lawyer. We hadn't heard from him. And, I said, give me a few days. Let me see if I can go another way. And I've got this friend of mine in California that actually owns part of the Golden State Warriors. And so anyway, I called him, and he plays golf with Bill Murray at the AT&T Pro-Am at Pebble Beach. And so I texted him. I said, Craig, his name is Craig Johnson, by the way. I said, Craig, I'd like to offer Bill Murray the Mark Twain Prize. We can't get his lawyer to even respond to us. Yes or no? He said, I said, will you give him send him a text that I can write? He said, I will. Only make it one sentence. no more than 2. I said, okay. I said, Bill, will you take the Kennedy Center Mark Twain Prize? Cappy. I get back about 5 minutes later from Craig. He copied and pasted the email. Well, from Bill. Well, I guess so. And so I sent Craig, I said, have Bill contact me because I want to take him to the White House and meet the president. So about an hour later or something, Bill calls me on his cell phone. And he said, incidentally, don't give anybody this number. I said, Bill, of course not. I wouldn't consider it. And he said, I'm going to give you my email as well. And he said, but I said, Bill, I need your social security number and all that stuff to get in the White House. I said, well, can I, bring my family to the White House? I said, absolutely. So he gave me all his family in the White House. So we meet finally at the Four Seasons at Mark Twain Prize weekend. And he comes in the lobby and he says, hey, Cappy, come on up. Let's go to my room. I want to change clothes and, before we go to the Oval Office, meet the president. I said, sure. About a week before then, the White House had called me and said, would Bill do an Affordable Health Care Act PSA, public service announcement? I said, well, I'll ask him. And Bill said, yes, but no script. I said, okay. So I went by the White House. I said, no script. He'll ad lib. Yes, he'll do an Affordable Obamacare Health Care Act, a public service announcement. So I go to his room. He has his Cub jacket on. Now, the Cubs are going to be in the World Series. They were not in the World Series as of yet. And the president, Obama, was the president at the time. He was a huge White Sox fan, not a Cub fan. And so Bill says, do you think I can wear my Cub jacket? And I got a coat and tie on. I'm going to the Oval Office. I've got to be respectful. And I said, he goes, do I need to change into a coat and tie? I said, no, you're Bill Murray. You can wear whatever you want. He said, well, I'm going to wear my Cub jacket. And I said, well, the president's not going to be happy about that, but go ahead. We go in the Oval Office. The very first thing the president says, Bill, I don't let any Cubs fan here, but since you're here, come on in. And so we had a really fun time. There's great stories in the book about
the book has terrific stories about that. By the way, I had a similar experience, which is I had Obama on my radio show, and at the end of the interview, I said, well, it's fine what we've been talking about, but the Bears and the Packers are playing tomorrow night, and I'm a Packers fan. And he just said, if I'd known that, I would not be on this show. So, I know some of the people here want to ask you some questions too, but before that happens, we got to talk about Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle is kind of where the sequence ends in your book. And Chappelle obviously is back in the news. He's on page 1 of the New York Times. Netflix is in this state of crisis over his special. So I just, give me your Chappelle take overall.
Dave Chappelle is one of the most incredible comedy geniuses of our time. There really is. I mean, there's very few people that rise to his level of just comedy. He's an odd and complicated person. By the way, he was very nice and kind through the entire Mark Twain Prize. But you go back through the years. I mean, George Carlin was very, very controversial. In fact, the 7 words you can't say on radio and television went to the Supreme Court. One of the early, I'm trying to think here. Hold on a second. One of the great, excuse me, just for 1 second.
While you're checking that, I'll just say I agree that this is one of
Lenny
the
Bruce.
smartest. Yeah, one of the smartest people I've ever seen do comedy is Chappelle. In a way, you're watching his brain as much as you're watching his sense of humor. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
The name I forgot was Lenny Bruce, and Lenny Bruce got put in jail many, many, many times. So you got Lenny Bruce, you've got George Carlin, and so Chappelle's not the very first comedian to say incredibly controversial things. I'm not going to condone what he says, but if you've seen the entire episode of the last Netflix special, this woman who's a trans, who takes her own life, he set up a trust fund for her daughter, and he loved this woman. He had her perform as a set before his sets, and so I understand the issue. I understand the pain and some of the the LGBTQ sectors. But, you know, he is a comedian. He is a satirist. He says stuff that's controversial. So I'm not going to defend him. I'm just going to say he's a complex guy, and he's not the very first person. If you go back from the very beginning of Lenny Bruce, I mean, goodness me, I mean, he was incredibly funny and very inappropriate many times.
Oh yeah, no, I'm a big Lenny Bruce fan too, and you know, I mean, Chappelle says it even in his Twain speech. He says, you know, he talks about how great the First Amendment is, and we have the First Amendment, and then he goes, we've also got the Second Amendment, just in case the First Amendment doesn't work out so well. Pretty good line. So I'm going to bring Jennifer back, because I think she has some questions from the audience. I will say that there's a whole other part of this book that's really about music, about your work on the Gershwin Prize. As far as I'm concerned, you can tell those stories when you go to Gershwin's house, which I'm sure you will at some point. I don't even know where that is. Although I do want to say thank you for Esperanza Spalding singing Overjoyed to Stevie Wonder, which was one of the great musical moments for me of the last 15 or 20 years. You know, I don't even know that if I knew who she was when she did it.
She is one of the most talented people. We've had her in 2 Twains, 2 Gershwins at the White House. She's one of the most talented people I've ever run across. So she's amazing.
I had the sense that Obama had a harmless crush on her. You know, anytime like the camera would pan over to Obama, he'd be in fanboy mode, I think. All right. So Jennifer, you want to come back and tell us, are there some questions that folks in the audience want to ask?
No, I don't want to come back, because I just want to listen to the two of you talk for a couple more hours. I can't, I'm sitting here alone in my little condo laughing out loud at so much of what you said, but also being really touched by a lot too. So I have to, first of all, I just want to point out, Cappy, I think you know this, but your friend you mentioned earlier, David Rubenstein, actually did a program with us this morning about his new book, The American Experiment. And
Right.
He mentioned that you and he are going to do a talk about your book at the Kennedy Center in next month. So
April 13th, David is going to interview me, and he's one of the best interviewers. Colin, don't tell David, but you're better than he is, okay?
Oh,
Since
boy.
this is going to be recorded, he's going to see this. Oh my God!
This is recorded, Cappy. You just. This cannot be. But they're both awesome. I have a question before we move to the audience questions. And audience, I would encourage you to chime in, because we really don't have too many questions. I understand that we've all been kind of enthralled, but gear up and ask some questions. But I'm going to ask one first, because this is something we talk about at the Mark Twain House all the time. People will often say Mark Twain is the first stand-up comedian or stand-up comic.
Right.
And we at the Twain House tend to say, well, no, not exactly. He was a lecturer, and he was a humorist and a satirist. But so these are fine distinctions. But can you talk a little bit about your understanding of that? And maybe, Colin, you can chime in too. And also then talk about the kind of gradations among the kinds of humorous people who have received the Humor Award, and whether they're primarily writers or performers, or is that a legitimate question?
Sure, Jennifer. Thank you for asking it. Ken Burns did a documentary on Mark Twain. I urge everyone to look at it. It's fantastic. And Mark Twain had some financial difficulties. I think he declared bankruptcy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And so he decided to go on the road and start to make money. And so he went to all these theaters throughout the country, and it wasn't exactly stand-up, but he told stories, and he told funny stories, and he criticized the Congress and made fun of the Congress and made fun of everyday situations. And so he wasn't, as you would call, a stand-up comedian in the sense of a Dave Chappelle, but he was a stand-up storyteller that told very, very funny stories. And yes, we have honored some writers before, and we've honored producers. Lorne Michaels won the Twain Prize. And so there's been a lot of people that have won the Twain Prize over the years that have not been comedians or writer, or people who don't do stand-up, but most of them are, and most of them had long movie careers or television careers or whatever.
Thank you. It's interesting that, one of the things that Mark Twain was credited with or best known for was his mastery of the pause, the comedic pause. And that, I think that's something that still is so important in comedy today. So,
Jennifer, I think one thing that might be relevant also to Cappy's book and also to so many of the performers who won this prize is Twain. He's so interesting in the way that there's a real blurring between the public persona and the private persona. How much of this is an act, how much of this is this kind of, he's so performative almost at all times. And Cappy, if the pandemic had permitted you to come to the Twain House to do this event, I know from doing these things with other people, one thing they like to do is bring you back into the archives where there's all this stuff that the public never sees. And I was back there, I think, with Larry Wilmore, and we were looking at some books where what Twain would do with his own book collection, with other people's books or the Bible or whatever, he would just be writing stuff in the margins that was often kind of hostile towards the author or just calling BS on whatever he was reading. But there's a performative quality even to that. There's no way Twain/Clemens didn't know that these books were going to be looked at someday. This was not just for his own amusement or enlightenment. And that's, when you look at a Chappelle, when you look at a lot of these performers, certainly somebody like Steve Martin, where these really stark dichotomies at times between, or even maybe less discernible, less clear dichotomies, where's the line between the public persona and the private person? I think Twain is one of the people who really starts that process, and in a way that continues on very well through the lineage that's in this book.
I think you're right.
And he was very conscious of it as well, as you say. And I didn't think of it in terms of his marginalia, but he was very, very conscious of the public image he was crafting and the effect he was having on people through his performances. So I'm glad you talked about that, Colin. Thank you. So Frank Markley in our audience says, and I think this is for Cappy, which of the prize recipients do you think is closest in spirit to Mark Twain, and which do you think Twain would have gotten along with the best? I think it's a really good question.
Well, the first person that comes to mind is Steve Martin, but then I quickly go on to Lorne Michaels. Obviously Twain's been gone for a long, long time, and so it's hard to say, but storytellers are so important. Whether you're a politician trying to get a piece of legislation done, you're a storyteller. You have to tell the story to connect with people, and Twain did that. He did that with Huckleberry Finn, which is my very favorite novel of all time.
Oh, wow.
But you have to connect with people, and all of these people that we've honored over the years have connected with people. The reason we started the Mark Twain Prize is to thank people who make us laugh and bring humor and joy in our lives. We live in such a time that is so difficult and so mean and so not pleasant. So we pause once a year to say thank you to people who make us laugh. And laughter is really great medicine. In fact, there's been some medical studies about how important laughter is. And I don't care how down you are or how bad the situation is, if you can find a way to bring humor in your life, that's very, very important. And that's the reason we honor some of these great people, like Bill Murray and Eddie Murphy and Will Ferrell and on and on and on, Tina Fey, and on and on and on.
Yeah, I actually think, just not that anybody asked me, but I actually think it is, for me, Chappelle and maybe Pryor. Twain, because he had a lot of anger, and his anger he could often turn into comedy, because he liked making people uneasy around the topic of race, and because I think it was Roy Blunt Jr., whom you mentioned in the book in connection with Bill Murray, but he talked about Twain's penchant for hell-raising, I think of these guys who are hell-raising comedians. He probably would have liked Carlin too,
George Carlin, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think he would have gravitated towards the troublemakers because he was, among many other things, a troublemaker.
You're absolutely right, Colin. Good comment.
Yeah, that's a very good comment. Thank you. I want to ask you, Cappy, and this is just kind of going way back to a whole different topic, but how did you come to be in this role? I mean, how did this all happen for you, that you were in a position to help create this? And can you tell a little bit more about your history? And
Sheer luck. I had a radio program as a sidekick, working my way through school, going to graduate school, got my MBA. And I did voices and impressions, and made a little bit of money doing radio advertising for voices and impressions. And when President Clinton appointed me to the board of the Kennedy Center, the president of the Kennedy Center, Larry Wilker, knew that I loved comedy because we had talked about it. And so it was during a board meeting where Larry had these three guys went to the White House when Ann Stock was White House Social Secretary to say, we'd like to do a comedy show. John Schreiber, Mark Cranston, and Murray Horowitz. And Murray was on NPR and does some NPR even to this day. Said, look, we'd like to do a comedy show here at the White House. And Ann said, you know, we're not being very funny nowadays because we've got some scandals going on. So she said, I'm going to the Kennedy Center. So let me bring you over there. And so she was in charge of institutional relations and basically dealing with the Congress. And she obviously was one of the more capable people to deal with the Congress because being a White House Social Secretary, she was also, she's truly one of the great ladies in Washington. And so we all gathered around and you know, Larry Wilker greenlit the Twain. And like I said, I bought a third of the seats out. Peter Kaminsky was brought in. He was a writer for the National Lampoon, one of the top writers of the National Lampoon. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, he brought in his brother Bob, who had done some television, comedy television stuff for the Twain. So there are so many people that deserve credit for the success of the Twain, and I give obviously everybody credit where credit's due. But you know, there would not have been a Twain without Ann Stock. There would not have been a Twain without Larry Wilker. Quite frankly, there would not have been a Twain without Linda Daschle, who was you know, former head of the FAA, and knew the people at American Airlines really, really well. And so she said, call Will Riss to American Airlines because we need an airline to fly in all the talent for the Twain.
Oh, wow.
They still fly all the talent in for the Twain.
Wow.
And so there's just so many people that have done so much to bring this to fruition, including Ambassador Jean Kennedy Smith, who changed her vote.
Right.
Awesome.
You know, speaking of that, Cappy, one thing I wanted to ask was, you know, the Jean Kennedy Smith story we've covered, but one thing that's not in the book, and I think I know why it's not in the book, are whatever debates are going on about who's going to get the award in any given year. And I'm just, obviously, those are probably behind closed doors. You can't tell us too much about them, but how many people do ultimately participate in the decision that it's going to be Steve Martin this year, it's going to be Lily Tomlin that year?
Colin, you called yourself a comedy nerd, and I am too. And your list of people who deserve the Twain will probably be our list. Over the years, I mean, it's, you know, the cream does rise to the crop, and we try to be thoughtful about who we're giving the Twain to. They have had to have obviously a great history of either movies, writings, television, stand-up, etc. And they've had to have great influence on those who followed. And so that kind of narrows the list. We didn't, and I'm not going to go into who we didn't offer it to, who definitely deserved it, but they just were not politically correct enough for the Kennedy Center for us to honor them. But the list is, you know, I participate, the president of the Kennedy Center participates, David Rubenstein participates, but the ultimate decisions made by the executive committee of the Kennedy Center, the leadership of the Kennedy Center, makes the final determination on who the Twain is. So it's a collective decision-making process.
And then how does the recipient find out? Is it one of those phone calls that they
Deborah Rutter either sends them a letter or calls them, and it's the president of Kennedy Center says we've picked you as the Kennedy Center Mark Twain Prize recipient, and congratulations. And we haven't been turned down since, except for Mel Brooks.
Yeah, I think it was Ellen DeGeneres who said that when she saw the list of other people who had won, she was partly thrilled that she had won. And then she thought, actually, when I look at some of these people, why haven't I won sooner?
You know, we were
Ellen,
so
by the way,
delighted a few years ago when David Letterman was just about, he had been named and had not gone to the ceremony yet. David, who does live in Connecticut, came to visit the Mark Twain House and learn about Mark Twain before receiving the award. And we were so honored that he chose to do that.
He's a great guy. I mean, I know he's kind of quasi idiosyncratic, but he's really a nice person and very gives credit for other people of his success, and he's demonstrated that time after time after time.
You know, one of the things that I liked in the book, and I don't think we should spoil your entire book, so people should be able to
go ahead, spoil it, Colin. Tell people to buy it.
It did seem, when you were recounting the incident where Letterman wins, that the people who participate, and I mean, I assume everybody who's watching has seen these things, and so you have this sort of A-list group of people who come out and kind of roast and kind of honor whoever's getting this award. It seemed like everybody really brought their A game to that. I mean, you've got, Steve Martin coming out on a rolling piano with Martin Short on top of it, and they've got material that they're doing, and then there's this fake top 10 list that really had some very funny lines in it. I think culminating the top 10 list is what are the differences between top 10 differences between Mark Twain and David Letterman. And I think Paul Schaefer says, well, I've been invited to Mark Twain's house, which is a great line. It just seemed like, the people are so used to auditioning for Letterman, trying to get on the show, trying to make him happy. It was like it seemed it carried over into the awards themselves.
Yeah, I mean, everybody that gets up there every year that honors honoree, they all bring their A game, and it's quite moving. I mean, some of them are so moving, the honoree starts tearing up in their box listening to them. So I mean, it really truly is a wonderful moment. Not only for the Kennedy Center, by the way, is our 50th anniversary, Jennifer, as you probably know because you've interviewed David, but we're happy that we've got two really great cornerstones for the Kennedy Center. One is the Kennedy Center Honors, and the other one, of course, is the Kennedy Center Mark Twain Prize.
And I think we can announce now that Carrot Top is this year's honoree, too. So,
no, Colin.
Colin, that was confidential.
Sorry about
you
that.
blew it.
No, he is not. I don't even, no. Thank you, though, Colin, for that great suggestion.
Oh, my goodness. What a lovely evening. So I'm going to ask one more question because we have just another couple minutes. And it's been occurring to me as I've been thinking about these award ceremonies. They are, as you said just now, Cappy, they're celebratory, and the honoree tears up and stuff. It's so different from the roasts that we see. Was that intentional? Was there a conversation early on? What is this thing going to look like? Are we going to roast this comedian, this comic genius, or are we going to? I mean, that's a little bit of a fine line.
There is, but this is a tribute. We are honoring the honoree, and obviously, all comedy involves a little bit of roasting. I mean, I think every comedian likes to roast, but you're right. I mean, the dinner the night before, which I've emceed every year, is kind of more roasty because it's not open to the press, and sometimes they say things that they can't say, when they get there the next day, and it's the next evening, and it is being televised. But no, it's most people are funny, and there is some roasty qualities about it. But at the end of every single roast moment, there's always a grateful and very sincere tribute to the honoree. So that's what makes it a lot of fun, and sometimes it gets emotional. I mean, Jonathan Winters, literally was so moved. It took him about 5 minutes to become funny because every honoree thinks about what they're going to say, but he was genuinely touched and moved, and then he went on and was incredibly funny, Jonathan Winters. But it really has been a wonderful, I think, 22 years, and 23 will be our on May 1st. So
So yes, please tell us a little bit about, so obviously COVID has interrupted the schedule a little bit, but so what is the next, tell us a little bit about what we can look forward to.
Well, we didn't have a Twain last year because of COVID. The Kennedy Center Honors was kind of a semi-public but not real public event. This year's honors will be in December, and it will be open to the public. You have to be fully vaccinated. I'm hoping that COVID is over. Who knows? But May 1st is the Mark Twain Prize, and I'm hoping that we can go in and have a great time, and everybody can come and give tribute to our next Twain Prize winner.
And you're all set for the bust? You got the bust covered?
I think Jennifer, but somebody at the Kennedy Center is in charge of that. But okay. I'm assuming that if we go to the White House again, I'll be carrying that bust.
Okay. What a I couldn't even come up with the word. Fabulous, fantastic, wonderful evening this has been. I can't remember when I've enjoyed one of these conversations as much. Colin, you did your research and were wonderful as you always are. And Cappy, it's so great to meet you and have you in our family. So one of the things I like to say is that the Mark Twain House is a home, writer's home and a home for writers. And Cappy, I hope that you will feel part of that circle of writers now, and I hope you'll come see us when you can.
I am honored to be a part of that circle of writers, even though my book is a little bit off of the Huckleberry Finn route.
No, it's. I think Mark Twain would have liked it, and I will tell you that when you do come in person, this is not a bust of Mark Twain, but we will give you your very own Mark Twain bobblehead doll.
I want one. I'm going to come visit, of course.
Okay. Well, it'll be waiting for you here. So, Colin, you have at least one of these, don't you?
No, I have the Mark Twain pool toy, but I don't have the bobble.
Well, we'll get your bobblehead doll, too.
Colin, thank you for your interview. I appreciate it. You're a pro's pro. And Jennifer, I really appreciate the invitation. It really was meaningful to me, and I was honored. I am honored.
Meanwhile, go Red Sox. Go Red Sox. Sorry, Cappy. This is New England.
They're going to have to edit that out, Colin.
That's baseball, right? Good night, and thank you to our audience for being here. And don't forget to donate to the Mark Twain House and buy the book. If you didn't want it before you heard this conversation, I cannot imagine that you didn't want to buy it by the end. So thank you. Thank you, Cappy. Thank you, Colin. And we'll see you both again soon.
All right, now.
You bet. Thank you.